But the big issue right now, the big battle that's going on in Congress and that is being debated across the United States in meta to it in many ways, is, are we a we society or a me society? Are we going to continue going down the road that Franklin Roosevelt put us on, of the New Deal, of everybody looking out for each other, of us being in this together, of e pluribus unum? Or are we going to go down the Paul Ryan, Ayn Rand path, Ayn Rand basing her writing on the sociopath William Edward Hickman, who was a serial killer, but in her mind, a Superman, because he put his own desires above those of society, and Paul Ryan doing this with Medicare. Are we a we society or are we a me society? And if we're a we society, how far does it go? There is a guy who claims that he has a particular weirdness. He wants to be a baby. Play this clip, Jacob, from News Report.
This is my nursery and this is my crib. I mean, there's nothing else like it, waking up in a crib as opposed to a bed. And sleeping in the crib, you wake up as a child and you can continue on from there. And it's easy to stay in the same mindset.
Yeah, and except that he's 29 years old and he's on disability. Now, Ron Miller's on the line with us. He is a conservative commentator, the writer, author of Sellout, Musings from Uncle Tom's Porch, president of Regular Folks United. His website, teamronmiller.com, and in which it says, government is a poor substitute for the care and compassion of our families in the home, our neighbors on the block, and the houses of worship down the street. Ron, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So lay out your thesis for us.
Well, when I heard about Stanley, the adult baby, and then just kind of stepped back and took a look at the landscape, it seems that there's a lot of arrested development out there when it comes to dealing with some of these issues. I believe in a healthy debate. I believe it's important for us to get out and really discuss issues, but it seems like we're substituting that for somewhat of a toddler mentality of mine, and not really sitting down and talking through these things like adults. So that led to me writing about the adult baby syndrome and expanding it, extrapolating it to some extent to some of the current discussions we're having about the direction that we're headed.
So isn't this, I mean, the way this looks to me is like, it's like Ronald Reagan came out, in his famous speech indicting the welfare queen, the woman who showed up in the Cadillac to pick up her welfare check. The New York Times spent 6 months trying to find this woman. She apparently doesn't exist, and Ronald Reagan had no knowledge of her having existed. He just pulled it out of his whatever. But this is just another of those kind of examples of people abusing the system. And there is abuse of the system. I mean, there are people who are probably inappropriately on welfare, on food stamps, on unemployment, on disability. Disability is there are a lot of lawsuits, probably more widely abused. Does that mean that we should get rid of these systems?
No, by no means does that mean that. What I'm saying is that he represents probably an extreme example, but an example of a mindset. And I'm thinking that as we go into this discussion, we really aren't dealing with the fundamental mindsets and the fundamental worldviews that are underneath all of the issues. It's one thing to argue about Medicare, Social Security, and these programs and how we're going to manage the deficit and everything else, but I believe that if we're not really sitting down and engaging in this discussion from an adult perspective and looking at the basic question, what do we believe as a nation is the fundamental purpose of government? And if government is to be involved in these areas, then what are the functions that we as free individuals, communities, churches, and others, what are they supposed to fulfill?
Well, Ron, let me put your mind to rest. This baby fellow, what's his name again? Stanley, is not a politician, does not speak for any of us. And if anything, he's the exception that proves the rule. He's that 1% of falling through the cracks, or maybe arguably even fraud. I mean, if he can make his own crib, he should be able to make something, I'd think, out there in the world. But we really don't know why he's on disability. I mean, maybe it's a mental or emotional disability. But whatever it is, I mean, this guy is screwed up, and he's not speaking for anybody except himself.
Well, I used him more as a metaphor because if you recall, I then went on to talk about some of the arguments out there that seem to suggest that to do anything about our current circumstances in terms of the budget is tantamount to throwing grandmother over a cliff, as the ad.
Well, some of the suggestions that have been made are tantamount to throwing grandmother over the cliff. If grandma doesn't, if you give grandma a $7,000 voucher and no health insurance company will provide her with health care, she's going to die.
Well, being as someone who's been without health care at different times in my life, I understand that, and I also understand that as it is right now, if we do nothing, then we are facing the possibility that none of us, regardless of where we stand on the political spectrum, will have this program available to us.
How could that be?
Well, the trustees have already indicated that we're looking at an earlier date for the basically the elimination of the trust fund.
In 1973, they said that Medicare would be out of business by 1980. In 1980, they said it'd be out of business by 1986. By 1986, they said it'd be out of business by 1990. I mean, we've been hearing these for 3 decades. We've been hearing these numbers. And basically, with small adjustments in the Medicare program, you can bring it back to viability. Like, let's let the government negotiate for drug prices. I mean, the Republicans have put all these poison pills in Medicare, and it's killing it. I agree with you. Let's take the Republican poison pills out and make it a program that works for everybody.
Well, I think it's important that we have that discussion at that level, and I'm not seeing it.
Well, yeah, I'll give you that. The Paul Ryan guys are saying basically, throw grandma off the cliff or cut Medicare. Let's say if you think that I'm being hyperbolic, cut Medicare, or we're not going to raise the debt ceiling. I mean, that's pretty radical.
Well, also, too, if I read the plan correctly, and I went to PolitiFact to see what some of the arguments were back and forth on things, I think that a lot of what's been talked about in the Paul Ryan plan has been mischaracterized.
Well, it's very simple. He's cutting $4.2 trillion in spending, and he's giving $4.3 trillion, excuse me, the numbers are backwards, in tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. I mean, how's that going to help grandma?
Well, that's a little hyperbolic too. You have to.
No. I mean, those are the actual numbers. Go look at his budget. But Ron, teamronmiller.com, a great website, a lot of useful information. Ron, thanks for coming on and talking with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.